Well, for his assessment of Mr. Trump's latest appointments, I'm joined now on the line from California by Erol Morkoc, who is chief strategist for Republicans overseas. Good to see you, Erol. You must be quite jubilant still after your victory at the polls. But let me start by asking you, the process of these appointments appears to be a much more accelerated one, doesn't it? Because back in 2016, when Mr. Trump first won, he seemed overwhelmed almost by the personnel process. Does it seem more orderly to you this time around, with key appointments being made in the first week?
Oh, absolutely, Charles. You hit the nail right on the head there. And Donald Trump was probably the first to admit it, not when he was president the first time, but first to admit it after the fact that when he was elected, he did not have a plan in 2016, really. We saw almost a month from today was what it took to appoint Rex Tillerson as Secretary of State. So Donald Trump had a transition team that was self-funded, by the way. Very interesting. Most of the time, the transition teams for the challenging party are funded by the U.S. government. Donald Trump said, no, we don't want anybody from the Biden camp to be involved in our transition team. So he self-funded the transition team. And that team with Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr., and a lot of other, big wigs in the party, they basically had come up with these selections well in advance. Rubio obviously was one of the more exciting ones to come out, but a lot of these people have been there with Trump for a long time. Maybe they were against him at first, using Rubio as an example. They had their words, or like JD Vance. And you've seen Donald Trump bring unique, different people into the fold this time. And that's because it's been pre-planned, it's been scripted. They're not going by the fly of their pants this time. And it's really nice to see that, Donald Trump isn't only going to be in there, but he's going to surround himself with the people that we want surrounding him. Because last time, that was his biggest mistake. He surrounded himself by people who didn't share his vision, didn't share the vision of the people who put him in office. And ultimately, that really sandbagged a lot of the policy his presidency could have achieved. So we're very happy with this situation currently.
Well, I mean, I'm going to come to the question of Marco Rubio in a bit more detail in a moment, but I'm wondering how much these appointments point to blind loyalty to Mr. Trump, who is known to demand almost fanatical loyalty, and how much are these people are people who are highly regarded?
Yeah, well, Donald Trump does value loyalty, and I think anybody who's in a position as him should, especially over the last 8 years that he's been through. The question is if their loyalty to Trump would outweigh their loyalty to the United States. I don't think so. I think they've all been proven to be loyal patriots, whether it be Rubio, whether it be Willis, whether it be Homan. These are people who are consummate American professionals. But when you are the executive branch and you're appointing your people, you gosh darn better hope they're loyal. And I think Donald Trump has put people who've shown themselves to be loyal. And that's something that, maybe people can castigate as seeming to be authoritarian or whatnot, but you have to keep in mind the gauntlet this man has gone through. So for him to rule effectively, especially with all three branches that he's gotten again by, the grace of statistics, we can say it's very rare to have this. Loyalty is key to enacting the president's policies, and more importantly, to his constituents. We want him to have loyal people surrounding him. So I think it's a positive thing for the country.
And I mean, the Marco Rubio, now, for all intents and purposes, the Secretary of State designate, we know that he has voted against providing military aid for the war in Ukraine and has supported Mr. Trump's America First policy, which seeks to keep the U.S. out of foreign conflicts, hasn't he?
Yes, I think, it's very exciting for a lot of us because this goes back to 1823, President Monroe, the Monroe Doctrine, essentially one of the founding principles of American foreign policy, that the Western Hemisphere is going to be off limits to European colonial powers. In the early 1900s, Roosevelt added the Roosevelt corollary to that to expand those powers. And that's what we used as justification during the Cold War, for example, in our hemisphere. And as the United States takes a step away from global conflicts and being the world police, and rather to be a world mediator who's bringing about end of conflicts, I think it's really important that we have somebody like soon to be Secretary Rubio in power. Number one, he was in the Senate Intelligence Committee. He was in the Armed Services Committee. When he was a young senator, I was a kid, so he's actually grown up quite a bit, and he's no longer the young man in the Senate that he used to be. And he brings a wealth and breadth of experience in our hemisphere from north to south that I think is really important, whether that be bringing stability to Latin America. Random statistic, 6.5% of Nicaragua's population came to the United States in caravans during the last 4 years, 6.5%. So the idea, if we're going to build a verdant Western hemisphere, we're going to certainly need to keep outside influencers outside. And somebody like Marco Rubio is going to lead that sort of bring it home policy. We don't want to have a war with the Russians. We want to find peace with the Russians. We don't want to have a perpetual war in Israel. We want to find peace there. But we also want to fix the problems we have in Latin America and South America, because this is our home and this is our side of the world. And certainly we want to work with our partners, not our side that we own it, but our side that we, are the hegemonic power of this side. So I think somebody like Marco Rubio is going to bring back that speak softly and carry a big stick policy through Latin America and South America. And it's something that America has sorely needed, as we've turned our backs, very sadly, on our allies in our hemisphere. And we've seen the fact that a lot of them have broken to far left governments, whether that be Lula in Brazil or elsewhere, such as in Honduras. And we certainly want to see peace and prosperity, especially with the North America-Canada trade agreement. Perhaps we can expand that. Perhaps we can become a more verdant supplier of resources to our hemisphere. And somebody like Marco Rubio, we hope, can lead that charge.
Well, that's an interesting proposition, because we know that Marco Rubio has actually come out and said that he does not support a ceasefire in the Israel-Gaza conflict, that he's willing to sort of let Israel finish the job. So that's a bit concerning, isn't it? But let me return to something that you mentioned earlier, how some of those relationships started difficult, but now appear to have gone into a more positive path. And I'm thinking of the same person, Senator Marco Rubio, whom Mr. Trump in 2016 called Little Rubio, tweeting that Mr. Rubio was a total lightweight who he wouldn't hire to run one of his smaller companies, calling him a highly overrated politician. How much does the transition from that castigating assessment 8 years ago to possible Secretary of State today make sense to you?
Well, I have to say that all's fair in love and war, and in a campaign, especially, those rules go out the window. Certainly, Marco Rubio said his fair share of derogatory things about President Trump, and President Trump hit back. I think he called him Little Marco and made fun of how he drinks water and has little hands and all sorts of things. But in the end, Donald Trump is, the unofficial governor of Florida, you can say, even though DeSantis is. And Marco Rubio is a Florida guy. And as time went by, as he saw Donald Trump's leadership, his opinion on Trump changed. He started to break with the establishment Republicans and realize, hey, Trump is actually going to deliver votes. And then you saw the Hispanic vote start to break for Trump. And that's where Rubio has made his bread and butter. And so I think if Donald Trump is able to forgive J.D. Vance for suggesting that he might be akin to Hitler, he certainly can forgive Marco Rubio for whatever Rubio said. I'm certainly Rubio isn't going to have thin skin. This is politics. This is how the game is played. It's not pretty, but these are just words. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And I hope that Marco Rubio has tough skin, because he's going to need it for the next 4 years.
Indeed. And in fact, Mr. Rubio was the one who said that the reason he's running for election into the Senate was to stop Donald Trump. But let's move on from that. I wonder, you touched on this briefly earlier, what insights you have into these selections and how they happen under Mr. Trump. I'm wondering whether calling it a process would be a bit of an over-characterization, and whether these are just connections and people that the president-elect likes, and he's making visceral decisions about them, unlike the typical selection process that we see with other American presidents.
If it was Donald Trump by himself, I'd probably agree that there's not much of a process. That's how he operates. But in this case, there's somebody by the name of Susan Wiles. And she is effectively almost like the dragon rider for Donald Trump. She has been the only person in history who Donald Trump will listen to and take counsel from. And that's why she's going to be Secretary of State. And, she refuses to talk to the media. She operates behind the scenes. And she has been, very involved in this transition team, as well as people like Tulsi and RFK Jr. and a lot of other surrogates. So while Donald Trump I would say this, if Donald Trump was behaving in his traditional fashion, you would not have had Marco Rubio chosen. You probably wouldn't have Lee Zeldin chosen for the EPA. he's definitely taken advice from people. Not that he doesn't like those people, but there's people who he likes better. So he certainly hasn't put his best friends in there. He's put people who his chief of staff has directed him as to be the best people. And she's the one who everybody watching the show really needs to go and do a little bit of deep dive in, because she's probably 90% of the reason why we were so successful in all three branches of the government. And she is a huge portion of this transition team. So I think a lot of credit needs to go to her, and a lot of credit needs to go to the rest of the team, because Donald Trump probably just got involved in this process now that he's won. And I don't think that he's only giving things out to his friends. As we just talked about, Rubio wasn't exactly his best friend, but he's an establishment guy who's kind of broken to the Trump side of things, who can sort of walk between both worlds. And he's probably a better choice than what a lot of us would have liked, which was going to be Vivek Ramaswamy. I wanted Vivek. Most people my age wanted Vivek. We thought it would be great, but we trust the president. We trust his judgment. And definitely, if the president was just asked off the cuff, I think he would have chosen Vivek over Rubio. But with wise counsel and somebody like Susie Wiles in the background, that's how Rubio and the rest of these men and women have been chosen going forward, especially Elisa Stefanik, who's going to be our UN representative. She's done a tiger's job for Donald Trump, and she's been rewarded for her good work, not just her name and loyalty.
Well, Erol, I want to thank you very much indeed, because you've, as always, brought some clarity to these fairly cloudy issues. But Erol Morkoc is the chief strategist for Republicans overseas. He was talking to me on the line there from California. And you're watching Arise News Hour. Plenty more to come. Stay with us.